Welcome to another episode of the Talk with Tech Leaders podcast. Today's guest is somebody who I've known and spoken to for a number of years now, and has also came to the first ever .NET meetup I did in Newcastle. Has also been a speaker at the event, and also a really good voice on LinkedIn when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and mentoring. So I'm really happy and pleased to have Terry Brown on the podcast today.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining me, Terry. Come down all the way from Whitley Bay to Middlesbrough. So I appreciate you coming down.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. It's I love talking about culture, about leadership and things like that. So these opportunities are just gold dust for me. So thank you for it. Yeah.
No worries at all. Fantastic. So could you just give, and I've done a bit of an intro there, but would you mind just giving a bit of an intro of yourself and sort of where you work, where you live, and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I mean, at the moment, I'm a director of engineering at a company called Muse. So they are like a SaaS company that deliver what they call property management software. So it's hotel management. So anything from front desk, making sure you get in the room effectively, all of that sort of thing, as well as, all the other ancillary parts. We provide SaaS services to hotels to manage that. Been there for about 7 months now and loving it so far. Still in the honeymoon period. And I lead a team of platform and security engineers there. So I've got four teams, a couple of platform engineering, some tooling and some security engineering as well. I live in the northeast of England, right on the coast at Whitley Bay, east of Newcastle. And when I'm not doing this management stuff, I tend to be walking the dogs or spending time with my wife and kids, who are all older now. They're going into their own careers. And I've done this now for goodness 30 years. So all the way through IC into management, and happy to share any of that background if it's useful.
Yeah, so let's go back to the start then. So at what age did you, get into technology and maybe think that this could be a career for me, and then sort of pursue that?
It was really early. I was really lucky. I sort of found gaming a little bit as a kid. There wasn't much at that age. I'm older than perhaps some of the listeners. So I got a VIC-20 back in the day. I was 8 years old. It was Christmas. My dad bought me a VIC-20 for Christmas. And I played the games on that, but it came with a book for programming. And I can't even remember what language it was now, but I remember it was between the Christmas and the New Year, and I opened the book and started following some of the examples. And I was putting commands into the screen, and I was getting results back, and I was just hooked. It was amazing. And it appealed to all of the sort of parts of my brain that had that sort of problem-solving element to it. So I wrote my first program when I was 8 years old, and in all honesty, academically, I was never great at anything from then through till now, really. But I was always good with computers. I could always talk to computers. I did well in my computing studies. Started there.
Yeah, great. And would you say, did you go down a traditional route of college, university?
I did, yeah. It's I went through and did like A levels. Barely scraped through. I as I say, I struggled academically. I did go to university, didn't finish. It was weird. Again, the academic part really I struggled with, and again, there's definitely something in my brain that struggles with academic study. But I did the first 2 years, and there was a lot of theory, and I just didn't get it. I wasn't enjoying it. But I was lucky the third year of the degree. I was studying at Northumbria, and the third year of the degree was like a sandwich year. So I got to go out placement, and I went over to Newcastle Medical School, and they were just doing some early work with the web. So I did some, I'm showing my age, Solaris sysadmin. I was writing like Perl CGI scripts at the time on the web. We were hosting locally, and I was just hooked. Like the idea that I could write a piece of code and anybody in the university or indeed the world could access it. And this was at a time when the web was still, Alta Vista was the search engine. Amazon wasn't quite a bookshop. And you couldn't really go off and Google, if you wanted to learn something like programming. So I was reading Perl books rather than actually going on the web. And that hooked me. So when I went back to finish the degree, I went back part-time. I stayed doing that role on a paid basis. And I finished all of the modules, but I didn't do the honours. So I actually never finished the degree. I've got what's called a degree with distinction. I panicked in the early days, of course, but touch wood, it hasn't held me back since. And it's actually changed my thinking of that academic path as well. It's definitely useful for those who go through it, but I don't think it's a hindrance now in the same way that it used to be. Like in the first few jobs I applied for, you needed to have that degree. You needed to have a 2-1 even, or better. And now it's, of course, not as important as it perhaps once was.
Yeah, I think it's great you were able to get that practical experience as well. So you're potentially able to demonstrate that at interview, saying, in your first, in your early jobs that, well, actually, I've got the practical skills as well. And I think that's quite important. So yeah, no, that sounds great. And I think, I think more recently I'm seeing more of, more people on LinkedIn and more people saying that, maybe degrees aren't as important in tech anymore. And when I mentioned earlier about, did you go down the traditional route? Now there seems to be quite a lot of different avenues in which people can go into. So there's people that are self-taught, there's people that do boot camps, and obviously there's still people that do the traditional route. I think it's all avenues to get in.
Yeah. And as I said, my son, so he's studying, in fact, the same computing degree I studied 30 years ago. So he's doing the traditional route, but and I know we'll talk about hiring during this, like I've removed the need for a degree from any job descriptions that I put out now, because I've worked with so many people now who've gone with a non-traditional route, be it they've actually left school at 16 and they've just loved coding, versus some bootcamp people as well. And I don't think there's any one differentiator in terms of what makes a successful person, what makes a successful software engineer or a platform engineer or anything like that. So I deliberately try to remove those barriers now, because if it wasn't important, well, why is it on the job description?
Yeah, great, fantastic. And so typically when I speak to developers, they tend to want to either go in two directions. They want to continue being technical and have no management, or you have some that either fall into management because they're really good developers, or they may then realize that they may have a passion for it as they start mentoring, people that they work with as they get more experience. So could you tell me a little bit about your journey in terms of maybe how you were in your early career, and at what stage did you then realize actually this management gig is something that I really like as well?
Indeed. I think I'm still working that out actually, but So I'm definitely one of life's introverts. It's weird. I'm sitting talking to a podcast and I post a lot on LinkedIn, things like that. And a lot of people are surprised that I'm an introvert, but I get all of my energy from myself. And most of my career, my early career at least, was, what you'd traditionally think of as like the backroom programmer. And I was happiest sitting in a corner, writing code, solving problems. I wasn't a big fan of the people stuff for most of my early career. And I think my pathway was pretty standard sort of growth. Don't think I ever started as a junior engineer, but engineer through senior. And the first 14, 15 years of my career were mainly IC work. I occasionally got pushed towards management because I was often the most senior IC in the room, but I avoided it as much as I could. And I finished on the staff, really. So I finished at the top of the IC path. First few years of management experience, I didn't enjoy it. And in fairness, I was terrible at it. I was awful because I had no idea what it was. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. People often fall accidentally into it. So it was the natural pathway after a senior engineer. Okay, what do we do with this person? They're brilliant at what they're doing. Okay, let's make them a manager. And it's a totally different job. But we didn't obviously realize that when I was going through this pathway. So there was often that sort of pathway straight into management rather than actually letting those people thrive as individual contributors. So the first few times, I jumped into management and then I got out of it as quickly as I could and then back into management and out as quickly as I could. And I think it was about 14 years ago, and I started to realize I was enjoying helping people. And I was enjoying solving people problems. And it was the same as me as writing code. I was enjoying writing code, of course, but what I enjoyed was the big picture stuff more than just writing the lines of code. And when working with people, solving those people challenges started to get fun. As I say, I was terrible at it, but a lot of the time in management, you get sort of thrown into the deep end of the pool and told to swim. And I had that same pathway. I suspect you've talked to many people who've had exactly the same pathway. And what I had was an IC career where I'd read books in order to get better at what I was doing. So I started doing that. And those early parts of management were hard, but I was lucky I had a team around me that knew. And I was honest with them and said, I don't know how to do this. But I'd go and read a book on feedback or coaching. And I'd come back to the team and I'd say, I've just read a book. I think I could be better at giving you feedback. I want to try on you, but I'll get it wrong. And it's weird nowadays, we talk about vulnerability in leadership. I didn't realize it was vulnerability at the time. I just knew I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But the team was super supportive. And that really helped me get into management. And then the past 14 years have really been just that growth. And for maybe the past 7 years, I've managed managers now. And I think I found my sweet spot. I every time I work with my bosses, who are often either VPs or CTOs, I'm not as much a fan of what they have as a job. It's too strategic for me. I like being close to the people while still having that sort of leg in the strategic pond kind of thing. So I suspect directors where I'll sit. I've no aspirations to go any higher than that.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned there that you sort of are the manager of managers. So you're mentoring these managers. Did you either in the early days or as your career progressed in management, sort out mentors yourself to help you?
Not in my early career. I wish I had. And I think, like a lot of individual contributors, I probably tried to solve the problems myself for too long. And I always set up mentoring now with my teams. Once I got further into management, maybe about 7-8 years ago, when I was just coming to the end of being an EM, moving into manager of managers, I got myself a mentor, somebody I'd worked with, and we just kind of catch up now regularly. And it helps. It helps massively. And we actually sort of share coaching of each other now. But at the time, it really helped me grow because you're taking the feedback out of the workplace and somebody to just impartially look and either give you pointers, give you challenge, are you really thinking about this in the right way? That sort of thing is super powerful. So I think certainly for any engineering managers or managers of managers, if they haven't got mentors, I always encourage them to do so. It can be really powerful. It can unlock.
Yeah, I really resonate that really resonates with me. Sorry, because sometimes it's good just to speak to someone as well, and outside of work, you can get everything out because sometimes you may feel like you can't really speak to anybody at work about the challenges you face, or maybe some of it might be confidential. But if you speak to somebody like one of your peers or somebody who's been in a similar position to you outside of that workplace, you can share ideas, maybe feel like it's less judgmental, and maybe feel a bit more confident speaking about it. And sometimes you work out your own issues just by speaking about it to someone as well. So I find that sometimes I'll talk to someone and almost answer my own question, but I couldn't have got there just with it being in my head, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think there's there's an important acknowledgement here. I just, even this morning on LinkedIn, Sarat, who runs a company in Newcastle, posted about how, it can look like success publicly when these people are sharing. And I share a lot of, thoughts and opinions on leadership. It can look like success, and really we're all making it up as we go along. And I think normalizing that, none of us have all the answers. We might be learning a lot, we might be growing a lot and things like that, but actually being okay to say, I haven't got all the answers here, and I'm trying to crowdsource what better could look like. And mentoring and coaching can be, huge value for that, for sure.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and strategy. So Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what are your sort of thoughts on this quote?
I love it. It's pivotal to how we deliver value, I think, in business. We often in business focus on delivery. We focus on trying to get features out the door and things like that. Which of course is, that's why business exists. It exists to create value. It exists to perpetuate that value. But in real terms, that value is hugely diluted if you don't focus on the most important thing, which is the people. And you can't focus on the people without focusing on culture. So there's the quote is a truism. Really, it's culture is the vehicle to get to value. So it doesn't matter what your strategy is. And there's a brilliant quote from, I'm not a big fan of his, but Elon Musk, and he talks about people within an organization are kind of the drivers, and he says people are the organization's success is the sum of its vectors, and every person is a vector in an organization. So if you and I work in the same organization and you're an 8 out of 10 and I'm an 8 out of 10, but we haven't got a supportive and clear culture that lets us know, what we can and can't do. And indeed, we haven't got a good strategy pointing us in the same direction. We could be running in opposite directions and cancelling each other's 8 out. So you do need culture. Of course, that's the underpinning. You also need strategy, but I think culture comes first for sure.
Yeah, great. And how do you go about building a positive culture within the teams that you manage?
It's a great question. I think I'll touch on that one separately. It's easy to talk about culture, and it's quite a woolly word.
Yeah.
Culture is everything that happens in an organization. And we often look at culture as the slogans on the wall. Every company has values, for example. Muse has 5 of them, and they resonate well with me, but different companies have different values. But Enron had values, and Enron went completely wrong. Boeing has a series of corporate values, yet their 737 MAX, has killed people. So you can't just have the values, you have to have the behaviors either that match those, or indeed, if you don't, the behaviors are your culture. And there's a really famous quote, which is, your organizational culture is the worst behavior your managers are willing to tolerate. So if I'm allowing underperformance in a team, or if I'm allowing people to shout at a team, or I'm seeing managers indeed shouting at their teams and not really keeping that as an active feedback, dealing with it, well, there's the culture, and I'm lowering the bar on the culture every time. But I think for me, how do I create that? There's a lot of models on this, and it's the 2-point grid that I love. Amy Edmondson has it with psychological safety. Kim Scott has it with radical candor, and it's about kind of high accountability, high safety, and those two in combination create effective cultures, because they create the right environment where people can have authority, they can have agency to do what they need to do. But they've also got a lot of safety, where they can bring up failure, where they can talk about that idea that might just be the next big thing, but they don't quite know. So it's for me, it's about high accountability and high safety. And Amy Edmondson calls this the learning zone. Kim Scott calls it radical candor. But those are the important things. And what does that look like for me? I'll be modeling some of these behaviors. So I'll try and go into a room and I've had 30 years of building up many of the wrong things to do in my career. So I have a lot of opinions, of course, but I always go in when I'm joining new teams and say, I will have an opinion on this. You need to see my opinion as the least valuable in the room. And often I'm just there trying to help steer a conversation or try to give input or alternative views on the conversation. So little things like that can create that high safety, making it safe to say to the boss, actually, no, I disagree with you. And then when you hear that, praising it, rewarding that behavior so that you get more of it. I think there's simple things you can do like that.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for psychological safety, and I've seen you post quite a lot about it as well. How, I guess it was a two-part question really. How do you ensure that the teams that you work in feel confident in sort of any meeting, any one-to-one, any group setting regarding psychological safety? And I guess as a whole, how do you think the tech industry is doing with it? So I know, sorry, two questions, but
great questions. I think it's worth starting with the second one first, because it's psychological safety is now a buzzword, and it's very misrepresented, misunderstood, and also in some places almost weaponized. So a lot of people think psychological safety is about creating just a safe environment. And of course, that's part of it, but it's only a fraction of what it's about. And again, it's jumping back to those high accountability standards as well. A lot of the studies originated in places like hospitals. Amy Edmondson's studies were often hospital-based. And these have really high accountability. And how do you make sure that you hear from the lowest? And, I'll use the term directly, but it's the nurse in the operating theatre when the surgeon is doing something wrong. You need to create that safe environment. But of course, there's high accountability. That person could die. Yeah. So I think it gets misrepresented as just creating the safety without the high accountability. And if you do that, you're in that sort of nice space where you're leaving money on the table as a business. So how are we doing as an industry? I think we could be doing a lot better. Not just tech, just generally business. I've definitely been in meetings and organizations in the past where psychological safety was mentioned so much in meetings that it was almost assumed it was there, but nobody actually looked at the behaviors or what the underpinnings were. And then how do you create it? Like I love, again, Amy Edmondson's model for this I love. So she talks about model some of your own fallibility. As a leader, I have a lot of opinions, but I don't want to dictate what the outcomes are, because I'll only ever get a diluted version of the outcomes. I need to hear all voices. And mostly in tech, we're working in uncertainty. We're working with complexity. We're working with ambiguity. Most of the time, we haven't built this thing before, or this new product, or this. AI is a great example. We haven't been here before. You need every voice at the table in order to maximize the outcomes from that. So modeling some of your own fallibility and saying, I haven't got the answers. I need everybody in this room to help me get there is one great starting place. And I think she talks about modeling curiosity as well. If I turned up and you were in a meeting and I said, why have you done that? Yeah, maybe going to be slightly more defensive. If I turn up and say, help me understand, you're going to immediately open up and there's going to be a safer conversation. So I think coming up with curiosity, and so many leaders don't, unfortunately. So it's easy to shut a conversation down. It's easy to shut ideas down. and certainly championing it when you see it. If somebody brings an idea, even if it's not a good idea, they've brought an idea, they've obviously gotten into a position of personal discomfort where they've brought an idea to the table. Champion that as well. It's not just about it being the right idea, it's about hearing that voice. So you can create the behaviors by almost, sounds awful to call it Pavlovian, but the reward the behaviors you want to see as well.
Yeah. And I guess within these teams and looking at these different ideas, how important do you feel allyship and diversity is within teams?
It's a great question. I mean, it's the evidence is huge now. And I would almost love a future where we don't have to talk about this because everybody knows it. We know that if everybody in a team looks like me, I'm going to get one set of ideas most likely because lived experiences will be broadly the same. And I often give a really simple example, but it's not to trivialize it, but when I worked at a company, we had, as part of the registration process, there was a title drop down for your name, and it had a finite set of entries in there, but it certainly didn't represent the trans community and probably didn't represent non-binary in general, and all of that reduces the impact of your product. And that's just a really simple example. There are many, whether you look at accessibility, whether you look at any of these things. So creating diverse teams generates better outcomes, and the evidence for that is huge. The intersectionality of somebody who maybe a black female it's a totally different lived experience to me. Their ideas and inputs into a product are as important, if not more important than the group of cisgendered, white, middle-aged males around the room, which is typically what we see in tech, unfortunately. So yeah, creating that is it's about business outcomes. Of course, it's the right thing to do culturally as well, but if you can't sell it to a business on the cultural and being the right, human thing to do, sell it on the outcomes, because the outcomes are better for companies that focus on this.
Yeah, great. And so leaders have a big impact on culture. And sort of in your eyes, what makes a great leader?
Oh, wow. There's so many facets to this. I think, again, like jumping into that sort of high accountability, high safety, like a person who cares. The leaders I've seen struggle most in organizations are the ones who focus more on the delivery than the people. And of course, in most organizations, delivery is super important, so it's easy to prioritize that. And it's often where we've come from. We, as individual contributors, we prioritized delivery, but our jobs aren't that as leaders anymore. Our jobs are to prioritize the people who are creating the value. And there is a jokey thing I often say, which is, without our teams, we are a group of people in meetings talking to PowerPoint slides. I'm not creating that. I code every day, but I'm not creating value for Muse. My power is in creating the right environment so those people can thrive. And if you look at sort of what are high performing teams, it's things like, a group of people who have clear context, who have a clear purpose, a clear mission and where they're going. They each have clearly defined roles and they know their part in that and how they contribute to the big picture. And then they have the freedom to do it. Daniel Pink talks in his book about intrinsic motivation, and we are intrinsically motivated when we have autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Well, purpose, most people would join a company and would connect to the purpose of the company. So that can be fairly straightforward. But again, as a leader, your job is to over-communicate that purpose almost. You can't ever undershare how important that is. And then mastery, so many companies will operate engineering teams at 100% capacity or beyond, unfortunately. That doesn't give teams any capacity to get better or experiment or learn. So actually creating some space, some slack in the system so that they can master their craft. Most of us as ICs wanted to do that. We wanted to get better. And then autonomy, it's again, such a buzzword in business. And you will hear managers saying, well, I want to empower the team. I want them to have autonomy. But then we don't share the context with the team. Well, you can't have autonomy without context. If you don't know as much as the leader, then you're always having to check in with the leader. Is this okay? Is that okay? And I love the work of David Marquette on this. His the book Turn the Ship Around, and he was leading a submarine, and he recognized that as the captain on a submarine he didn't fully understand, he couldn't effectively lead them. So he had a group of people on the sub who knew all of their stations impeccably. So he turned them all into leaders. And rather than him signal orders, he asked them to signal the intent. So I intend to submerge the ship, or I intend to navigate north. And that's so powerful because we should be creating leaders in our environments. And the only way you can do that is maximize the context, maximize the safety, give them the direction, and then try and get out of the way a little and let them just do that. And yes, they will fail, of course, but they'll learn through that failure, and you create the guardrails around them so they can do that.
Yeah, great. So that's some great insight in terms of what you think makes a great leader. So how would you describe Terry's leadership style and why? And could be interesting maybe to see if that's maybe changed over the years as well.
It definitely has, yeah. Another great question. Yeah, it's I'm not sure how I started as a leader. I didn't think I had a style in the sense of I didn't know any. I didn't. There's some defined leadership styles. I didn't know any, so I was making it up as I went along. I still am making it up as I go along, but at least I understand the styles now. So for a long time, especially as an EM, once I found servant leadership, it clicked for me. It's, the idea that I am not the value creator. I should be a value amplifier. So servant leadership turns the org on its head kind of thing. So the pyramid doesn't have the CEO and the VPs at the top. It has them at the bottom. Their aim is to support the people who are creating value, which is typically the individual contributors. They're closest to the, a Northeast phrase, but they're closest to the coalface. They're typically the ones who are able to see the detail in the product and indeed what the customers and how the customers are using it. So it's my job to create the conditions where people can do their best work. Servant leadership is a little bit misunderstood, I think, again, like a lot of elements in business. And a lot of people see the servant part of that as creating the support structure for the team, but it perhaps is about being nice. I need to support the team. I need to help them. And that's true. Well, there's many other parts to servant leadership. And when you look at, the definition of servant leader, there's many facets to it that many people aren't engaging in. But I think more, especially since I've been a manager of managers, there's another style of leadership which I really like, democratic, sometimes called participative as well. And I think that helps solve some of the challenges of servant leadership. So I don't want to be the person that people are looking to. I want to create the environment where everybody is looking at each other and solving the problems together. And democratic, and it's similar to that David Marquette book about Turn the Ship Around. Democratic brings everybody into the room as a leader. They control their own space, and it's democratized between us. And of course, if there's key decisions to be made, or I see it going in a very wrong direction, of course, it's my job as a leader to flag that. But the more I can create leaders in everybody else, the more effective I'll be. And I only partially joke about this when I join an org, but success for me is being able to step away from that role 12, 18 months and not be needed. Now, thankfully, that's never seen me lose a job. But the less I'm needed, the more successful that team can be. So it's about creating the conditions where they can do that. So definitely those two styles. And then a lot of its context after that, like Muse is going through quite significant growth at the moment. So some of what I'm doing is a little bit of the sort of pace setting leadership style. So, trying to help people get to a future and understand the pace of that. And some of that is transformative, on getting them to see that big picture in the future so that they can understand how their part plays in that transformation. So there's a few other styles I'll lean on periodically when the situation needs. But I think the ones I now typically coach on and recommend as defaults are a combination of servant and participative or
yeah, so I guess then you're adapting to sort of different situations and different progress in which companies are at and different levels that they're at as well.
I think you have to as a leader. Yeah, it's there was a great book many years ago. It's an old book now, but Gerald Weinberger, and he talked about software consulting. And there's a phrase in there which he said, "No matter what they tell you, it's a people problem." And it is. Writing software is typically not about the lines of code. I mean, it is on a base level, but ultimately you have cross-team dependencies, you have external customers, you have, blockers, you have all of these things, and often they're people challenges. So as a leader, you have to be able to adapt to that. And it brings in things like empathy, emotional intelligence, all of those things as well, because you can't be a leader in an environment and not be able to adapt to what tomorrow brings, because it's going to be different to today.
Yeah.
So it's pivotal.
Yeah. And do you feel conflict is important in high performing teams, and how do you tend to deal with conflict as well?
Yeah, it's this is going to come out wrong to start with, but I love conflict. That's not technically true. Like I'm not a person who navigates toward conflict, but the more you study it, the more important conflict is. And conflict can be something as simple as just giving somebody feedback. That's putting you into a difficult situation with a person, an uncomfortable situation. But conflict is highlighted now again in all the evidence that it's critical to good outcomes. And there's a brilliant book. I read it in, I think, almost every org I join now, with a book club. And I try to make sure we have a good conversation with it. And it's Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he has kind of this pyramid, almost like Maslow's hierarchy. So you start at the bottom with trust. And of course, if you haven't got trust, it's difficult to progress through the other layers. But the second layer is fear of conflict. And that's a dysfunction, because teams often avoid conflict. If you and I disagreed on something and we didn't have a good trusting environment, you might not tell me, well, we've just diminished an idea, or we could have gotten to something better had we had conflict. And he then goes above that. So from conflict, you go to lack of commitment, lack of accountability, inattention to results. And results are why we're here. So you have to deal with the layers below it. And conflict is critical. I had a great chat with one of my teams yesterday where we were talking about a particularly challenging situation. And the manager in particular was getting a really hard time from the team. And it was brilliant. I loved it. I was, mostly just observing. And I think he was enjoying it as well. But we got to the end of that and it was so much better an outcome, because he'd heard the voices in the room. Now, my job as a leader there is to try and make sure that everybody knows that was okay. So at the end, I amplified that had been a brilliant discussion, really powerful, getting to better outcomes, which is one of the ways Patrick Lencioni suggests to actually improve conflict. If you see it, and it generates a good outcome, or even if it doesn't, amplify it, like be clear about it. You can't get to high performing without healthy conflict, because you'll never then get a challenge on the ideas that could make those better ideas.
Yeah, great. Some really good learnings there. So I wanted to sort of switch lanes a little bit in terms of, I wanted to talk about how you assess developers to join your team. So I work with a lot of junior, mid-level, senior level developers who I find in the industry a lot of ambitious people who want to sort of progress to the next level. So typically by doing that, they may look to move companies. So with yourself, how do you tend to assess developers at interviews? Maybe something to do with their problem solving skills. And then I'll ask another question in terms of maybe how some of the common pitfalls and mistakes you see as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think actually just before that, I'll cover what we do internally as well.
Yeah.
That's super important. For those people who are looking at growth, often people look to need to change jobs in order to grow, which is such a shame. And I always encourage people to have a career framework. I've helped build one at Muse. I've built them in previous orgs as well. And it just helps you articulate, okay, what's the difference between engineer and senior? How can I have a good conversation about, my personal development? Well, a career framework can really help. And in any org, if you haven't got one, there are websites out there that, there's lots of open source ones now. I've open sourced one in a previous company. So make sure that you find one that just fits and have a chat with your manager, or, as a manager, find one and have a chat with your teams. At interview, really for me, I think the key things I'm looking for are less about the technical skills. Mostly the right person can grow technical skills. And certainly that's less of the challenge. So I'm often assessing, does this person have a growth mindset? Have they got this view that if they don't know how to solve something today, they'll find out how to solve it and they'll come and solve it tomorrow, kind of thing? That's super important in our career, because it's all about problem solving. And if you get stuck in something and think, that's it, I'm stuck, you'll struggle to be successful. So having that mindset that is optimism, I think, is tomorrow will be different because I'll help make it different. That's huge, and that's very much the growth mindset. We do interviewing badly, typically in our industry. I know I've been asked, I remember turning up to an interview, I won't name the company, when I was an IC, and it was a .NET interview, and I was asked whether a collection goes on the heap or the stack. I said, okay. Now, I'd operated at scale. At the time, I was working in a gambling environment, which was huge scale, really high throughput. And I never had to care about whether something was on the heap or the stack. Yes, I had to care about things like big O notation and stuff because, when you're working with large collections. But asking that sort of question at interview, which is Googleable, and, those aren't good questions. Tell me how you've solved a problem with is a much better question. Tell me about your experience of is a much better question. So mostly I'm looking for how that person has solved similar problems to the ones that we're facing, and I'll phrase the questions around that. Typically, that's going to be, if it's working well, it should feel like a conversation. And it's lovely to get to an end of an interview with somebody, and they'll say, I really enjoyed that chat. And it felt like a chat, and that's brilliant. You've done well there. Because it's not that you're diminishing what you're learning from the person. You're just not grilling them with these technical details. You're looking at how they approach and how they solve and all of that sort of thing. Mostly for me, with technical people as well, I'd have like a first stage interview, which is very much, who are you? How do you approach problem solving? All that. I will do a technical interview as well, if that's, the sort of role we're hiring for. And we mentioned diversity and inclusion before. We do have a technical test on most of our tests, but it's take home. I'm not a big fan of coding in an interview. It's super stressful. And depending on who you are, you won't thrive in that environment. But that's typically not how you're doing the day job either. So why would you artificially create that scenario?
Yeah.
But equally, I'm really open-minded. Like if somebody's got a GitHub link on a CV, I'll go and look at that. If I can see examples of what they've done and how they've done it, well, I might not technically test them because I'll just have a conversation about the work they've been doing. I will still do a technical chat, but I won't need them to do the technical test, because why? You're asking people to prove something they've got massive evidence of proving. So yeah, that's typically how I approach it.
Yeah. So I guess you're trying to make it as easy as possible, and not in terms of like easy as the interview, but you want to make it the environment to be quite positive, quite easy to speak to, and have that positive outcome at the end of it, rather than maybe like a grilling and a Q&A and making somebody feel they might leave the interview feeling like, I've just been through it then.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's and it's weird. I mean, Muse is a place that is moving fast. It does have high delivery standards. It does have high accountability. When we're doing the day job, it doesn't feel stressful. So why would I want an interview to feel like that?
Yeah.
I want the interview to be a mirror of an organization's culture, and indeed the culture I'm trying to create. So it should feel as comfortable as what's happening in the day. And often that is about trying to make it feel like that conversation. You're still getting the answers, but you're just not making it about heaps and stacks, and you're making it about how do you solve problems.
Yeah. So what would you say maybe some of the sort of common pitfalls or mistakes that developers may make at interview, and how could they maybe prepare themselves best so then they give like the best account of themselves and their experience as well?
There's a couple of things. I'll start with the end of the interview first, because it always sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
When I interview anywhere, typically I've done a bit of research on that company. I'll turn up with about 30 questions written down. Now, I won't ask them all, because obviously the interview will have answered a lot of them. But if somebody can say I've prepped 30 questions and I jump in and I pick 3 of them, that's a really good look. A lot of people will not have come prepared with questions, and I think that I really value people who've done a little bit of research and then they'll ask something about the things that seem to be mattering to the company. I think a lot of us treat interview as a one-way process as well. It's absolutely not. That person is interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing them. And I love it when interviewees ask questions as well, or ask clarity. If something's not clear, just seek clarity. The best candidates are doing that. And again, that's showing me how that person's showing up to a conversation. If they start trying to answer something, but you recognize they haven't fully understood the question, again, that's not ideal. So I think be clear that it is a two-way process as well. You're interviewing them. Thankfully, tech is a good space. There's often more than one job for a person, and you getting the right fit for you is super important. So you almost making that part of the conversation as well, I think, is super important.
Yeah.
If that helps.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's really useful for people to know. So I wanted to see if you had any success stories of any developers that you've managed over the years, and in terms of them potentially, doing some really important work that they were recognized for, or maybe progressing through the levels quite quickly, and what your experience was of that, and what good things you could potentially share about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some definitely. It's worth being clear first. Like, not everybody is on a rapid growth trajectory. That's fine. It's there's somebody in the .NET space I used to follow as an IC, Scott Hanselman, and he talked about dark matter developers. The people who came in, got the job done, and went home. Every organization needs those, because you need to get good stuff done. And some people will be on a slight trajectory. I've worked with brilliant engineers, and when I've, they've been forming and things, and when I've said, okay, what does your personal development look like? If you got to the end of the year and you were successful, what would it look like? And they'll quite clearly say, I have no idea. And it resonates. I didn't know that myself as an IC. I was growing rapidly, but so long as I turned up the next day and was solving, interesting problems and working with interesting people, I didn't really have a plan. I think for those people who are most successful, a few of the common things I see. So one is they keep a diary. It's and I advise this to everybody. As you come around to things like performance review season, or you're trying to think about a new job and you're articulating on your CV what you've done at a company, having just a high level diary of, the things you've done, really powerful, because it's a great conversation starter. It's great evidence. So keeping a diary, really simple. Often the people who are being really successful think about the impact or the outcomes of what they've done rather than just, I shipped a feature. There's a difference between I shipped a change to the registration process versus I shipped a change to the registration process that saw an uptick of 3% in registrations. That's huge, because you can turn that into financial impact. And a lot of people don't quantify for themselves the impact they're having. So doing that as well. And definitely the people are having good one-to-ones. They're bringing questions to their manager. They're talking about growth, because although we own our own careers, there's a brilliant person in this space, Gerge Arosh, who has written books on it. He publishes newsletters. But he talks about, of course, your career is your own, but a good manager will support you in that. So I have growth conversations with my managers. I have growth conversations and skips with their teams as well. I will do my best to help in the way a manager should, but it's always their career. So owning your own career and making sure you're investing in yourself. A lot of people don't take personal development time when a company supports it. Do it. It's because I've worked in companies that didn't, give you that, and it's you're losing out on an opportunity. So take whatever opportunities you can to grow your own career, and you might not be on a rapid growth, but always a little bit of investment each day is never a bad thing.
Yeah. So would you say that continuous learning is really important in software?
I mean, for those people who aren't, they typically will fall behind. Yourself, like tech is moving fast. Even 15 years ago, I wasn't really hosting in the cloud. And now I wouldn't think twice about that just being a default. Security, although it was a big deal 15 years ago, wasn't the big deal that it is today. And every engineer needs to shift left on security and make that part of what they're doing. Testing wasn't as big a deal. And that's irrespective of all the different tech stacks and, approaches and architecture patterns like microservices, distributed architectures, all of that sort of thing. Our space is moving so rapidly. When I first started writing a Perl script to serve something over the web and talk to wasn't even a database, it was a flat file system. Relatively straightforward. Doing that now is CI/CD, it's automation, it's all of those things. So yeah, you have to, continuous development has to be part of our careers, or we've possibly chosen the wrong career choice.
Yeah. So with your team at the moment, do you encourage personal development time? And if you do, what sort of direction do you direct the developers to take in terms of how they can do that?
Yes, is the short answer. What I always try to do with my managers and indeed their teams, I try and emphasize being at ideally less than or equal to 80% allocation. And I always qualify that and say, you should feel one day a week you've got nothing to do. And that feels super uncomfortable to a lot of businesses, because am I losing a day a week of productivity. But there's so much good theory on this, like queuing theory and utilization suggests that if a person's at 100%, you're often getting to wait times of almost near infinity when things have to change. So if you've got a task switch or anything like that, well, it's hard. And I always have this visual metaphor of we're in the UK, so I can talk about motorways. A motorway with cars on every lane that's full. It's a car park. It's not moving. If you remove 20% of that traffic, okay, suddenly they can start to change lanes. They can move. So I'm a huge fan of reducing utilization in teams. That improves flow, improves value creation. What that does is also create some space so that people can grow and learn. Even just doing that can make a huge difference. It can give people that space to go, you know what, I'm just going to go and do that thing, or I'm just going to go and fix that challenging part of the code, which is growth for them because they've never looked at part of the code. So there's lots of different ways of looking at growth like that. Outside of that, having things like the career progression framework, so you can look and say, okay, here's what my growth pathway could look like. Here's the things I could be getting better at. And that's not just technical. Of course, technical is always interesting, but once you get to sort of decent mid-level or even into senior, you can manage your own technical growth fairly easily. You can be coached by a manager, but you can manage it yourself. What are those human skills that'll help me? How will I better communicate? How will I better plan? How will I better break down tasks? And having those as part of a personal development plan, really, really powerful. But you've got to make sure that's coupled with having the space to actually then invest in that for sure.
Yeah, great. That's some really good advice there. So one thing I wanted to touch upon, and this is based on just our chat, is that I've noticed that you've mentioned quite a lot of books, a lot of authors. So I guess I just wanted to ask if there's somebody who is sort of at the beginning of their management leadership career, what sort of books or what sort of authors would you direct them to look at, to read? And I guess from yourself, from speaking to you, you've mentioned that from like the age of 8, you were reading programming books. So I guess another question would be like, how important do you think reading is?
It's taken me to worlds I couldn't have possibly been to as a child. So I found a love of it pretty early with fantasy books and science fiction and things like that. For now, it provides me an insight into a leadership world that I couldn't have experienced myself, whether that's reading something from Simon Sinek about how, you can make business an infinite game or a finite game, and, you can make short-term versus long-term decisions, whether it's Brené Brown and talking about what courage and vulnerability looks like. Like, these are all just potential tools that you can bring to your own practice. So, yeah, reading is essential. And thank goodness there are so many authors. For engineering managers, I'm a big fan of Will Larson. He's got a book called An Elegant Puzzle, which is a great pathway into management. But there's also she's an amazing author, and she's written a book called The Making of a Manager, which is superb. Julie Zhu, I think she's called. Those are both good books. But outside of that, just studying the space, there's so many authors looking at Sidney Dekker on how you look at failure and creating, safe spaces for that. Looking at Brené Brown in terms of vulnerability and courage, Amy Edmondson around psychological safety. Goodness, the list is huge. I publish some reading on my own blog for people who's interested, but I could talk for hours on the books and what you can take from each of them, kind of thing.
Yeah, great. So I know when we met earlier a little bit, we talked about mentorship and how you mentor other managers as well. How important do you think that is, and why do you particularly enjoy mentoring other people?
It's, again, my worldview is quite small on a day-to-day basis. Like, I work in a company, I have the same 4 managers, we have an isolated set of challenges. And I'm quite lucky that throughout my career, I've worked with both managers and ICs who I've stayed in touch with, really. And they're often facing challenges totally different to my own. So even before this podcast, I was mentoring somebody who works in a consultancy environment, and they're a recently new EM. Now, consultancy environment is very different to a regular, business environment, because your teams are often formed out in different places. You're not close to the teams day to day. So managing them is a very different challenge to the challenges I would have faced as a manager with a durable team. So being able to mentor or indeed coach a person through some of those challenges gives me more insight. It helps make me better as well. Aside from the fact that I love the chats, this is Simon Sinek has that book, Start With Why, and my why is trying to create better cultures and better management. And that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what I would love to do if I was running my own business, going into businesses and help them create better managers. So sitting and talking to these people who I've worked with, who I care about, and helping them navigate challenges it's fun, but it makes me a better manager as well. So yeah, hugely important and great.
And what does the future look like for Terry and at Muse, would you say? I know it's quite a difficult question to answer, but I guess what are your sort of plans?
Muse as a company it's a fascinating mix at the moment, a huge growth. It's just received 110 million in funding. It's the first unicorn I've worked for, so it's just been recently valued at just over $1 billion. So that has its own set of really interesting challenges, scaling an organization at pace while trying to solve for, the technical challenges as well. And the technical challenges are really interesting. We are 12 years into it as a business, so we have some technical challenges around growth and scale and things like that. The org is really behind those, but I love that mix of, people growth and technical challenges. I think as we chatted earlier off camera, I've never had a desire to go beyond director. And this is no slight on any of the VPs or CTOs I've ever worked with, but the role is too strategic. I wouldn't enjoy getting up and doing that every day. My current boss, Ryan, loves the strategic, and that's his happy place. For me, I like being closer to the people. I like being closer to the coal face. So director is that perfect sweet spot between engaging in the strategy, of course, and helping lead and create that vision, but also being close enough to the people that I can feel like I've got some direct impact through my managers. So I'll probably stay in this role. I have no desire to change that. Longer term, I would love to have my own company and go into companies and help them analyze and improve their cultures. Again, that would be just so much fun, because every company is different, every culture is different, every set of leaders is different. So jumping in and helping them do that would be amazing.
Yeah, no, sounds amazing. Terry, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting to me today. And I'm really excited to look into some of those books and offers you've mentioned as well, personally for me as well, for my growth. So yeah, it's been a great chat and great learning for me as well. So thank you very much.
No worries. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Kasim. It's been brilliant. Thanks. Cheers.